This will define everything for the New York Islanders. We've talked a lot on this channel about different players on the forward core who can step up and provide more offense. And of course, for the Islanders to take a step up from last season, they are going to need to have more contributions from younger players. But at the end of the day, you look at this lineup and who they have on this team, and it's really clear that if the guys that they're paying to be their top players are not that, this team is not going to go very far. And when it comes to Bo Horvat and Matt Barzal, I don't really have questions about either of those guys. But then the next guy you look at, and the guy that brings a lot of questions to mind, is Kyle Palmieri, who was returning from an ACL surgery. And on this episode of Islanders Digest, I really want to focus on Kyle Palmieri, go through some other players who have had this injury in the past, and kind of evaluate what we can still expect from this player, especially considering that he is 35 years old. And I do think that aspect of it makes it a bit more complicated. I'm going to be honest, going into this research, I had a very negative opinion on what Kyle Palmieri would have look like coming off an ACL surgery. It sounds very bad. And when you look at other sports like football or basketball, players who have ACL injuries who come back never quite look the same. And when it comes to hockey, we don't really see that many ACL injuries, but in my head, that made me think, oh, this is even worse because this is an uncommon thing. But I think doing this research has really put me at ease. I still have a lot of questions about this roster. One of them I've seen really put down my list is Kyle Palmieri. And that's because doing my research, I was not able to find that many names who have suffered from ACL injuries, especially after the age of 30. I kind of cut off for that to really look for it. But then when I kind of saw the production from those years after and read more about how the ACL just isn't a central ligament when it comes to skating, and that's why there's typically less pressure on it. You really only see injuries to it when it comes to big collisions. As a result, when you do return from that injury, typically you're not putting too much strain on the ACL. It's not like the NBA or football where you're putting a ton of pressure on it, and that's why the player isn't quite the same. Hockey players, we've seen much stronger bounce backs, and I think the best way to start this conversation is talking about a player we're all familiar with in the former captain of the Islanders and Anders Lee. It is still weird to say that, but let's talk about Anders Lee and his injury. 2020, 2021, we all know what happened. He had that collision playing against the New Jersey Devils, and he tore his ACL. And this is pretty notable because this is actually how the Islanders got Kyle Palmieri. They needed a replacement in production for Anders Lee, so it's kind of funny how this is kind of coming full circle here now. But while he talked a lot about his struggles returning from this injury, he did a lot of work off ice. When you look at the on-ice production for Lee, it paints a way cleaner picture where he returns that next season and he puts up 28 goals in 76 games. Other than the season where he played with John Tavares and he put up 40 goals and 34 goals, and the year before last season for the Islanders, he put up an impressive 29 goals and was close to his career high in points. 28 goals is basically the height of what you get from Anders Lee. So for him to put that up the year after he returned from the surgery and then to follow it up again the next season with 28 more goals, this is a very encouraging sign. And with Lee, it took him a while to get full speed in terms of his skating, and notably, I think his defense for a bit took a bit of a step back. I think some of this was also confidence on his part after being out of the lineup for so long. But when you look at the actual production, it is very clear that he recovered strongly from this injury. And more importantly, after that injury, he has a very clean bill of health. After that injury, you look, he played 76 games a year, he returned, and then 82, 81, 82, 82. A grand total, he missed what, 7 games for the New York Islanders during that entire span after his return. He was incredibly healthy, and this kind of reinforces what I'm realizing, that this is not a situation where you're going to have to be really delicate with Kyle Palmieri. It seems like these ACL surgeries, when you come back, it seems like you're in pretty good shape from there. Of course, doesn't factor in the rest of your injury, your history. Everyone has different history, and Kyle Palmieri has a lot more injury questions in his career than when it comes to Anders Lee. But in terms of this shows that, it's not going to be a situation where we'll be lucky if we get 50 games from Kyle Palmieri. You should expect what you expected before. And while 82, especially at age 35, might be 84 now, 5 games in the season, might be a bit much, pretty confident you can get 75 plus games out of this player, which is really what you need. Now, the next two players I want to talk about, next is Anthony Mantha. I think this is a really interesting case, especially when it comes to players coming back from this injury. Anthony Mantha had his best season ever after he returned from his ACL injury. The year before, he's playing for the Calgary Flames, 2024-2025, played 13 games. A lot of people wondered if this would be the end of Anthony Mantha, getting injured in a deal that he was trying to prove that he still belonged in the NHL. He comes back for the Penguins last season. The defense, again, was notably very questionable for Mantha. I, in particular, have criticized a lot of what he did defensively last year, which is why I didn't really want him for the Islanders. I didn't think he was a great fit. But in terms of his production, he had his best year ever in the NHL, putting up 33 goals and 31 assists in 64 games. This reaffirms that players can come back from ACL surgery and score a ton of goals in the NHL. It does not seem to really impact the goal scoring of the players returning. And you look in particular with Anders Lee, with Anthony Mantha, both of these players kind of play similar styles to Kyle Palmieri, where they kind of get dirty for a lot of their goals. They're aggressive. Like some would call them power forwards. Maybe Kyle Palmieri not to the same extent. If anything, he's a bit more of a perimeter guy than these other players. But the same type of physicality, that snarl that he has in this game, at least on the offensive side. I know Mantha is not very snarly defensively, but on the offensive side, he definitely has a kick to his game. And this shows that players who come back from these injuries, they still can muck it up in front of the net, things like that. There doesn't seem to be a lot of risk there. Mantha actually had his healthiest season ever coming back from this injury. This is not me saying that Kyle Palmieri is to be healthier than ever, but it just goes to show that I think some of my concerns were overblown. And I want to find one example of an older player, because notably Kyle Palmieri is older than Mantha and Anders Lee when he had this injury. And the best example I could find was Joe Thornton, who notably tore both his ACLs. One in the 2016-2017 season, and then the second one in the 2017-2018 season. Coming back from the first one, he was still able to put up, you look up 36 points in 47 games. And then the following year, I believe at this point, Joe Thornton was 38, was still able to put up 51 points in 73 games. And had more goals than he had scored in the two previous seasons, which I know he played less games the season before, but this goes to show players, there's pretty good history when it comes to players returning from this injury. And when it comes to Kyle Palmieri, this almost gets me to the point where I'm more concerned just about the general fact that he's 35 than him coming back from an ACL. Yes, there's going to be questions about that. One thing that adds is when you're recovering from an injury, you're not having the typical off season that you would have. There's a lot more rehab involved, things like that. That can kind of take away. So when you're an older player, some like the strengths that you've built up over time. But looking at Kyle Palmieri and what he's done in the past, and kind of comparing him to these other forwards, I don't think it's crazy to think he can come back and put up what he put up 2 seasons ago in 48 points. Maybe you subtract a few points for age, but a 22-goal season, maybe 20 assists for 42 points in 84 games does seem very realistic considering the histories of players coming back. If anything, when it comes to Kyle Palmieri, my bigger question is just more, is this going to be an issue with him being 35? Because in addition for him coming back with an injury, this is kind of the age where you expect a fall off anyway. And I really appreciate there's an article written by Dan Brosseau. I don't know if I said that correctly. Apologize, Dan, if I got it wrong, but I will link this in the description below. And notably, there's another Islander player noted at the end of it, so definitely check that out. You're not going to love it. It does have to do with regression, but I thought it was a really interesting piece to read. And when it comes to these regression curves, I would classify Kyle Palmieri for his career as a top 6 forward. You kind of look at the age based on this chart that top 6 forwards kind of fall below the replacement level line. It's this 35-year-old season, or really kind of right after this 35-year-old season, I guess you'd say. So at 36 years old, these top six forwards typically become a replacement level player, which means you just bring in the average player from anywhere. They can replace that player. So when it comes to Kyle Palmieri, there is concern when it comes to the age, but I think more of the regression might come from just the age fact than the actual ACL, at least based on what we've seen on the other players. Again, it is a small sample size, not saying Kyle Palmieri's recovery is going to be exactly the same, but I guess all this is to say I'm less concerned about the ACL in general. And as a result, I am more encouraged that Kyle Palmieri can be an effective player for the Islanders, which they are going to need him to be. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and just give him project that he's going to score 22 goals, 20 assists, and that's going to be his season, factoring a little bit for regression. And when it comes to the Islanders, maybe the concern is less that Kyle Palmieri is returning from an injury and we don't quite know what to expect, and more the fact that you have a lot of middle six, former top six forwards who are approaching that 33 to 36 age, which is where we see huge declines. For example, Braden Shen is right around that age. So even though he's not coming back from an injury, you have concerns, similar concerns to what you have for Kyle Palmieri with him. In fact, we've seen more regression when it comes to Shen than a Kyle Palmieri. A Pajot being more of a middle six player, those regressions tend to happen a bit younger. He's going to be 33 next season. So maybe that's kind of more the concern as opposed to Kyle Palmieri coming back from this injury. But let me know what you think about all this. Did this video make you feel more confident in Kyle Palmieri returning? Do you have more concerns after watching it? Let me know what you think he's going to produce in the comments below. I'm really feeling a lot more confident when it comes to this player and what this can look like for the New York Islanders. And that's encouraging because if this team is going to be competitive at all, it's hard to see that happening with Kyle Palmieri. We saw what the offense looked like without him last season. There was a huge step back. And now without Anders Lee, someone's going to have to be your net front 30 goal scorer. And looking at the names on this list, other than Heineman, I can't really see anyone who's fits that bill. And for the record, Heineman doesn't really score that type of goal. Maybe a little bit Pajot, a little bit Shen, but even then, Heineman, Shen in particular, are more perimeter players. So Kyle Palmieri is going to be very important for this team, and hopefully he can prove that ACL injuries aren't as concerning as they sound in the NHL, at least with the proper recovery. But that's going to do it for this episode of Islanders Digest. Let's go Islanders.